Welcome to the panel room. Today we're talking about book rights, specifically what happens when an author gets those rights back. Unless you self-publish, as most people know, you sell the rights to publish your book to someone else, and in some cases, you need to get them back. But before we get started, let's go around the room, have everyone introduce themselves, and let us know a little bit about what properties you've had or have going through that process. And I'll start with you, Jeannie.
Why, thank you very much. I write urban fantasy, paranormal romantic suspense, and space adventure with my friend Nancy Northcock. I got a publishing contract with Kensington for a 4-book series, and my editor passed away, so they sort of did a reorg and all that sort of thing. And after suitable time period, I got my rights back. And so I'm playing with how to make sure that that works for me now that I have my rights back.
All right, perfect. Alma?
Hi, I'm Alma Alexander. I write fantasy and science fiction. I have got 2 stories really to contribute to this. The first one is kind of current. I wrote a novel a long time ago, a very long time ago, which weighed into nearly 250,000 words. And the publisher who picked it up at that time took a look at this massive 250,000 word doorstop by a complete unknown and said, split that puppy and we'll do a duology of it. So the book got split into 2, like volume 1 and volume 2, and volume 1 now ended on an unholy cliffhanger that was never meant to be there, because you meant to go on to the next chapter, not the next book. So they got published in 2 books, and at the time I was okay with that. I mean, I got 2 advances, I got 2 sets of monies, and that was all great. Thank you very much. It all worked very well. And that was originally published in New Zealand. And then I moved to the States, and HarperCollins picked up these books as the duology. They wished to rename the first book, and we had a committee working on it, and they came up with a title that none of us liked, but none of us liked each, it just got complicated. We just picked a title at random. So then these 2 books then happened to be out. So the second book, or the second half of the book, was still called Changer of Days. The first half is now known as The Hidden Queen. At some point during the lifespan of these books, Changer of Days, the second book, the second half of the book, the publisher helpfully let it go out of print. And,
oh my.
And essentially they reverted the rights to me, which now left book 1 with that cliffhanger ending, sitting there in limbo, with no closure to it at all. And I got messages from people saying, "What happened to book 2?" And I said, "Don't look at me." This was no.
It's not my fault, man.
This is no business model that I could possibly stand on the tail of, because I could not understand why they wished to keep half a book in their hands. But they did, and they did, and they did. It took me 7 years to get the rights of the first book back. And there was a lot of misinformation along the way, and they would give it back to me if I bought all the copies in their warehouse, which was 250 and then 130. And it felt like they were selling thousands of copies of this thing. I mean, there were just couple of 100 copies sitting in the warehouse. Eventually, it turns out there was no copy sitting in the warehouse. So there could be anything to begin. It just got confusing. Anyway, I got the rights back. So what I'm doing right now, and I'm hoping to do it before Christmas, is I'm putting it back together in a single volume, like what it should have been in the first place. And I'm putting out a 20th anniversary edition. Right. So that's what I'm busy working on now. The second story involves a whole different series, but I'll let someone else talk for a while.
Great. Jim.
I'm Jim Nettles. I write science fiction, urban fantasy, bit of horror, bit of contemporary, bit of this, that, and the other, as well as nonfiction. And I have had a series blow up with a publisher that, had the rights, got the rights back. I've had, of course, there's a lot of things with short stories, novellas, novelettes, things like that, where rights come and go and expire, as well as the nonfiction side of the world, where a lot of the time you're selling rights for a period of time, or licensing rights for a period of time, or they're topical. So And then from a services standpoint, frequently with clients, I am not an attorney, but I'll play one on TV if anybody wants me to. A lot of the time get pulled into trying to help look at contracts and rights and see about helping people get rights back if they're trying to take stuff indie, if there's problems back and forth. So I've seen it from a lot of different perspectives.
All right. Quinn.
Well, I've been writing professionally for 54 years. And the biggest thing that I've had to get the rights back to were all the Saint-Germain books. And there are—
Which I adore, by the way. I'm a huge fan.
Well, thank you. It took 2.5 years to get all the rights back. And it was a slog every step of the way, even though, of course, it was spelled out in the contracts that when they ceased to be available, then the clock was ticking. But of course, they said they didn't mean that. They meant, they were out of copies, but they were not out of print. Now, exactly how that works, I've yet to figure out. Luckily, I consulted an attorney who knew how to write really, really scary attorney letters, and we finally got them all back.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yes, well, now we're in the process of trying to get them get them republished, and I'm working with a new publisher, and they are very pleased at having it. But I look at this big stack of books and saying, you do realize that there are 33 of the little darlings, and I'm about to start 34th, and they don't seem to be scared yet. But, one never knows. I also do science fiction. I do fantasy. I do young adult books. I do westerns. I do nonfiction. I do mysteries. Basically, if it's fiction, I probably write it. And it's very, the thing that you don't realize that a great many contracts have in them is that even though you reach the point where you should get your rights back automatically, you don't. You have to write to them and ask for them, and they have to agree that it's time that they give it back to you, and that can take absolutely years. But if you don't do it, you can be tied up in wrangling that can go on for a decade.
Yeah.
And who needs that?
It was one of my first questions. Is there a standard time in contracts for rights to revert?
Depends on the publisher and whether you're doing multiple books for them or not.
And depends what you mean by standard. Let me tell you my second story quickly. Speaking about young adult books, I wrote a young adult series, which the critics couldn't agree on one thing. Half of them said, this is the best thing since Harry Potter, and it's the best things for Harry Potter withdrawal, and get these things. And the other lot was saying, this is completely original. It's nothing like Harry Potter, so take your pick. Either way, these books were picked up by a very senior editor at HarperCollins who liked them a lot, and she helped me a great deal. She was amazing. In fact, she sent me these detailed editorial letters of 11 single-spaced pages kind of thing. I thought I did a good book, but I mean, she came up with all kinds of things that I didn't even see were there. She was amazing. She battled for these books. They had a champion in that thing. Fast forward to 2008. Does that year mean anything to anyone in this panel? The bloodbath of 2008, when the publishing world imploded in New York.
Yeah. And
I thought
sacrifice of editors. Yep.
Yeah, I thought my editor was safe because she was that senior. But then all of a sudden I get this letter saying that, well, she's just been let go. In the space of a year and a half, I had 3 editors, 4 publicists, and an unknown number of in-between people who were trying to keep this thing together. And by the end of it, nobody cared at all. The first book came out in hardcover and paperback and did okay. The second book came out in hardcover and paperback, and it was already starting to tank. And the third book never came out in paperback at all. It came out in hardcover, and then people just stopped having any interest in these things. So they disappeared. I finally got the rights back to those things, and I went with a small, one-person startup publisher. I wanted them back in print. And she did put them back in print, but she was a very small startup publisher. The marketing was non-existent, and dare I say, the formatting was not fantastic.
Oh dear.
So they came out in paperback, and I wrote book 4 in the trilogy, which she published as an original. So now there are 4 books in paperback sitting there. But she was doing nothing for them. They were published, but they were sitting there, and they existed. That was all I could say for them. So I finally, after 7 years, I signed a contract for 7 years there. After 7 years, the rights reverted back to me. I've got them back now, and I'm republishing them again with new covers, and I'm hoping that third time lucky, because these are really nice books, and they're nothing like Harry Potter, and they're very much like Harry Potter, and everybody should read them.
It's all magic.
Yeah.
So my next question is, and I'll start with you, Jim. Does your newly reverted book need to be rewritten, or can you just republish it as is?
That's a really simple answer. It depends.
Simple and yet somehow vague.
Okay, so yeah, that's the
Expound.
entire answer. That's the entire panel. It depends. I really think it depends, because if you've got something that is time-based, you might have things you want to update, or if there have been some cultural changes. Sometimes, depending on what the genre is, you might want to sand it off. You might want to go in and make some changes. One of the weird things that I have seen in contracts is that I had a publisher say that their edits belong to them. And so what the writer had to go do was go work through a brand new round of edits, working from a copy of the manuscript a couple of versions back, one of the earlier drafts. So from that perspective, you had to go back through the entire re-edit process, which meant you had new editors, new viewpoints, new date and time, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's really a big, it depends. Now, if it's shorter stuff, like a lot of the time, if you're talking about stuff for anthologies, collections, things along those lines, those have a 12 or an 18 or a 24-month reversion period. And if you're going to go republish that, you may want to refresh it a little bit or something like that. But if you're talking about full-blown novels, it really depends. The question, first of all, is, are there changes you want to make as the author that you can do and still be true to the book? Are there changes and things you've got to do based on the new publisher, if it's going to a new publisher? Or if you're taking something that was previously published and going indie, are you wanting to revise it to maybe make that trilogy Quinn or quad or whatever you want to call it? Do you want to create a new series out of that? Do you want to have spinoffs in the universe? Or maybe you look at something and you're like, the way the publisher had me write and do this was X. I always wanted to tell the story in a different structure. So, it's like everything else. It depends.
Yeah.
So Quinn, what about your thoughts?
Me?
Yes.
Well, I don't like to have a publisher's foot in my mouth or an editor's foot in my mouth. If there's something wrong and I did it, I'll take responsibility for it. But I don't like to spend time explaining that part was actually written by somebody else and it's not credited to somebody else. I didn't do that. And earlier on in my career, I started sewing in 1968. It was difficult to deal with some of the editors, because there was this belief that science fiction and fantasy was entirely aimed at 14-year-old boys. And as we all know, that was not true. And
Oh, how far we've come.
Yes, there's sometimes I wonder, this insistence on a genre label, does it help or does it hurt? And I've never made up my mind about that. Because
Apropos that, I just vividly remember when I was doing a reading for Secrets of Jin Shay when it first came out, and I was in my local bookshop doing a reading for it, and in marches this cohort of, as you say, 14-year-old, I mean, I think they were 15 or 16-year-old boys, which was so not my demographic. I mean, this is not a book for 14-year-old boys at all, but they looked at this thing and they saw Jin Shay, and I honestly think they thought it was a new martial art. Because they basically came in and they sat down and I started to explain, and they realized this is a book that's chock full of girl cooties, and they got up like to a man jack of them and marched out very fast.
So, Alma, did you have to do much rewriting when you're putting your duology back together with the little Band-Aids?
This is what it currently looks like, but what I'm trying to do is give you this. But I actually went back over it. I did do a few changes, but nothing major. This was really difficult because this was supposed to be a project I was supposed to share with my husband, but he died in February, which means he never saw any of this. So I was sort of slogging through it by myself, and I didn't do that much of changing. I did do a few bits and pieces, but I didn't do that much of changing. This is a surprisingly solid book, given the fact that it's now coming up for a 20th anniversary edition, if I say so myself. But I didn't find that much that I needed to radically change in it. That said, one of the characters in this book, which came alive as a throwaway name in a conversation at the beginning of the book, grew like Topsy into a character who was very, very real and very, very self-possessed, and who is now demanding a book of his own. So
do that, you know.
Yeah, all the best of them do. So at some point in the near future, and maybe the next year or two, I'm probably going to be writing, I'm going to make it a duology again. I'm probably going to be writing a spin-off book and sort of not a sequel, but a standalone novel in the same universe. So what I was doing when I was going through this thing is actually going through the book and pulling out all the references to this character and putting them in a separate file so that I'd have them sitting there with the second book to be begun about him.
Oh my gosh.
And Jeannie, what about you?
Well, I think one of the things that for me, my contract with Kensington Publishing was a 4-book contract, and I was on the last book and my editor died. And so, you know how those sorts of things are at the big publishing houses. Somebody leaves, they completely reorganize the division. Okay, so we're going to add this part to it, and we're going to add that part to it. And so if you can fulfill that and you want to stay, great. But the new editor had come from a different house where I don't know if you're familiar with the Brava line of romances out of Kensington. They're extremely sexy. They are very geared toward the publishing niche that really likes a lot of sex in the book. And they said, well, every book you need to add 2 more sex scenes. And I said, well, that would not follow. That would not work. Mm-hmm. And so we were in the midst of new contract negotiations, and those sort of broke down and said, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. And so at that point, I began the ticking clock of my rights reversion reverting on the 4 books that I had with them. And at this point, all 4 have reverted to me. And now I've just got to find the time to update them and polish them. And because, you know, the book you wrote in 2008, if you've written any in between 2008 and the present, you've become a better writer. So you have to look at updating the technique, but you also have to look at updating the tech, because it changed so fast, and tech was part of the storyline. So I think that one of the things about getting your rights to revert is watching one of the things that was unique, I think, is that the minute I knew I had the chance to get the rights revert, I did not sell the books. I did not promote them. I did not do anything with them. I didn't do advertising. I didn't talk about them. I didn't, because I wanted less sales. The one instance where you want less sales. So for me, it was looking at the overall picture and thinking, okay, I don't want to promote these books, even though there are a lot of the good books that I have. I just didn't want to promote them because I wanted the rights to revert. I didn't want people to go, oh, this is a great book, let's buy it, and have then that one and the 3 others languish. So I hope that answers the question.
Would they have kept them if your sales had picked up on them, or?
Well, my sales were extremely good, thankfully. Let me knock wood here on all 4 books. The difficulty is that when my editor died and they brought in a new editor, they basically reorged the whole department, and her footprint in the department was to bring these sexier books in, and there was no way to rewrite any of the 4 books to me, I felt it was gratuitous. It was gratuitous to add 2 to 3 sex scenes to every book that didn't flow naturally. And so one of the challenges is they could have reissued the books and were eager to do so if I would add 2 more sex scenes to every book. I might have been able to do it with 1, but the other 3, I really am fairly plot driven. So it just didn't work out for us. And we parted company on very good terms. And they've been really wonderful to me, and I really appreciate them. But I wasn't willing to put in gratuitous scenes just to please somebody that was new.
All right, Quinn, when you reissue, do you want to keep the old covers or update the covers?
Hell no. Have you seen some of the old covers?
True.
I know, right?
Not on the vet. I would like them to be at least more or less uniform. That would be nice. And I would like them not to look like romances, since they aren't. It says the subtitle for every single manuscript says an historical horror novel, because what a lot of people don't seem to understand about that series is that the most important person in each one is the woman. It's about the lives of women in history. And I can imagine the extreme enthusiasm when I first sold Hotel Trans back in 1975, saying, yes, there's a vampire in this, but he's a good guy, and it's really about the girls.
Yeah, you were really one of the first people to sort of put the vampire in a positive light and positive role.
And a recognizable vampire. That was the tricky part.
Yeah.
Well,
And
if you're going to live a very long time, or be undead a very long time, you are going to lose everything you knew. You will have no more family, you will have no more culture, you will have no more language. Forgive me, I'm sorry to do this.
Well, and the other thing I'd probably add to that too is if you're going through a publisher, they own those covers. The author doesn't own
Yeah.
those covers. So
Actually, the artist does.
yeah.
And
Well,
I was really lucky on Ariosto, which is a fantasy in an alternate world. And Don Mates did the cover, and it was his first award-winning cover. And when I met him that fall at the World Science Fiction Convention, and I was told who he was, I just went up and hugged him, because that is a gorgeous cover.
you
And
got some magnificent covers, yeah.
oh yeah, he's wonderful, and and he's a reasonable kind of person, so that you can actually talk to him about what he's trying to do with his art, and he can tell you. And that's not a common affliction that most artists are able to get through. You can, if you ask them about it, you're going to end up with something you may not understand at all.
That's one of the things I found most challenging when my rights reverted is, according to what I was told from Kensington, the book has to be altered from the published copyrighted Kensington version because they edited that book. So it has to be edited again and changed. And the covers have to be changed. And in the case of most books, and I know, Quinn, you probably had this too, you have to update things tech-wise, and you have to update things like, obviously, the world has changed in terms of how we view different groups that we work with, and even those of us who may have used trans or may have used people who were LGBTQIA in our books, even then, the whole acceptance level and challenge of how things are working in society, you have to change it. You have to update it. Now, I know there are plenty of people who just get them back and don't touch them. Basically, they change one or two things just to prove, to tweak one or two things just to make sure they've changed it for publishing rules, and they put new covers on them, but they don't do anything else. But I never felt like I could do that.
Again, the answer to that is it depends. It depends on how rooted the thing is. I mean, if you're doing something that is science fiction or that's got any kind of tentacles in our society, if you've published that book in 2005, today is a different planet. It really, I mean, just think about something as simple as cell phones. How many people did you know that were running around glued to their phones back in 2005, which is now ubiquitous? I mean, you go down the street and they're all going like this kind of thing.
Well, and even some of the simplest, oh, I'm sorry, Quinn, go ahead.
I guess, they're not only doing this, they're not paying any attention to traffic.
Yeah.
And also the simple fact is that there's a radical shift by the existence of the cell phone with a camera. You've destroyed a certain genre of spy novels where they had to smuggle in cameras and they had to smuggle in all kinds of interesting things. What all they have to do is, okay, here, I'm going to take a picture of this hyper secret document and put my phone back in my pocket. I mean, there's an entire sort of set of circumstances that simply doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Well, I mean, just having a cell phone period blows away a lot of storylines.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm doing a series of mystery novels that takes place in the 1920s, and trying to remember that whenever the word phone is in there, to put an apostrophe at the beginning of it, because it was back in the 20s, that was an abbreviation for telephone.
Well, and you also have to look at what's changed in society as a whole. And I mean, just transportation, the vast changes in how we move about the country from 1975 to 1985 to 2020, mind blowing, just
do you guys remember seeing the early ads for plane travel, when people dressed up in high heels and pearls and got served 3-course meals, and security was non-existent, and even somebody who came from that era to ours and tried to get on a plane right now would probably have a coronary, because it's just not.
Well, and I think too, one of the things we have to look at in terms of revising once rights return is, was the book published pre 9/11? Because if it was, everything has changed in terms of, like you said, Alma, in terms of airports and security for airports. You have to go in and do a rewrite if your person, your hero, your heroine is
It makes you
going.
wonder what's going to happen with books published post 2020, because given the future that used to be and given the future that we're living in, that was a break year, and we are living in times of plague. And if you wrote a novel that, that takes place in 2030, you're probably going to have to reconsider that quite considerably now, because we're getting close to 2030, and well, COVID, sorry, I mentioned it. Sorry, the buggerings happened.
Or you can keep it true to the time that it was written and as it existed then. Do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then you don't have to go back in and try to insert things that weren't there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think sometimes it depends on how clear is it as to what time period it was written in. Because if you're writing, if you wrote something for mid 90s, a lot of the technology is changed radically, but other parts of it, I won't say haven't changed that much, because everything technologically has shifted and changed radically. But it's easier to bring that up than if you wrote something that was set in the 50s. If it's set in the 50s, you go and say, I'm leaving it in the 50s.
Yeah. And actually, there are issues that happen in the 50s that we don't even think about anymore. And, I was born and brought up and lived most of my life in Berkeley. And the 50s were not happy. We had the HUAC and Tail Gunner Joe making life miserable for academics. And when I was in 4th grade, I was followed for 3 days by the FBI.
Well, you were troublemakers starting early.
No, I wasn't. I was one of the weird kids.
Yay.
Oh yeah, I think
Huzzah for the weird kids.
Oh yes, huzzah for the weird kids. And I find myself, when I read something that hasn't been appropriately researched, that is set in like the 50s, there's inevitably something in there and you go, no, wrong. And
make that tacky buzzer sound.
Well, and it's very hard to sometimes explain why breaking the division means that you're breaking the storyline, whether you like it or not. And no matter what, you are stuck with the fact that if you're not true to the time, your characters will not ring true, because they, like everything else, they're a product of their time.
Right.
I don't know about you guys, but I feel that the setting of any story is as much a character as any of the people.
Absolutely.
Now, what happens if you get a book you've written, you wrote it about a time period based on your understanding at the time? Now that the rights have reverted and you've learned something different, do you go in and change it, or do you leave it the way you had it originally?
For the most part, I leave it the way that I had it originally. But if there's something that is sort of a gaping problem, then I have to do something with it. Not necessarily, a major rewrite, because when you're doing a 30-book series, it's amazing how they all have to talk to each other.
All right, so
rewriting is usually my choice.
So my next question, and I'll start with you, Alma. What do you do about reviews?
Ignore them.
I mean, if you've got it,
They were basically reviewing a book that was originally published, and that stands. I mean, they reviewed a book that existed, so that's fine. What reviews may come but after a rewrite or after a republication or after a re-release, that's an entirely different kettle of fish, and I'm going to treat them as a reviews as of a brand new book, because this kind of is. It's not something that. Look, let's put it this way. I've got a couple of quotes that were appended to the originally published duology, and I had absolutely no qualms in using that as a promotional backbone for the new edition, because these quotes were for that story, were for that book.
Right.
It's basically a different format and a different shape. It's a different kind of animal, but the story itself, the thing that those quotes were about, that's still the same material. And I have absolutely no qualms in taking well, I've got a particular quote on one of the covers from SF Site review of one of the two duology books. And it's a very nice quote, and I'm probably going to be slapping it somewhere on there, because it's still the same book. It's the same story. The quote was about exactly what's in front of you. It's not like I've suddenly taken the name. And what I haven't done is what they do when they adapt it for a movie. They'll keep the name, and then you go in and see the movie, and there's nothing left of the book except the name. I haven't done that. Basically, that any quotes, any reviews that happened in an earlier incarnation, they still live. I mean, they're still applicable to the new animal, if you like. But having said that, I am also aware that any further reviews that might come are going to be reviewing an entirely different thing. The other reviews were dealing with book 1 and book 2, and they were possibly reviewing book 1 and maybe not book 2. So they might have something to say about that dreaded cliffhanger that I was talking about, which just isn't going to be an issue in a full sort of single volume novel. So they might be able to concentrate on different aspects of it. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes up in the aftermath, when I've put together two disparate things into the whole that it always should have been. And I'm actually quite interested to see what people might think of the book when it comes out in the shape and form that I originally wrote it in.
I actually think that's one of the hardest things about getting your rights back, is that you've gotten your rights back from a traditional publisher, and it was published however many years it was published. And there's a bank of reviews, 5-star reviews that you use in your marketing, like Alma said. And you may say, this glowing review came from this Amazon reader and yada, yada, yada. It's great. Well, the problem is you have to reissue a new ISBN to republish it, and those will not transfer over
They don't.
to the new book. So it looks in some ways like this is a brand new book with no track record and no positive viewpoint about it. Even though you might have 1,000 reviews on the other, Amazon and most of the other platforms will not let you transfer them one to the other. So you sort of feel like you have to start over. Now, the good news is, as Alma pointed out, you can still harvest all those comments about what is essentially the same book and use them in your marketing, but they won't appear in the description when you upload the new version. So you have to sort of start over again on that one.
Really the only thing you can leverage is the reputation that those reviews got you on the other incarnation. So somebody goes and looks and they see, well, there's 3 different versions of this book. Which one can I buy? Well, they'll see the reviews. I mean, so there is a little bit of carryover, but yeah, the reviews won't carry over because in essence, it is a new book, a new publisher. So you don't know what the level of content is between them and all the rest of that. And I think the other thing you see going on here is sometimes it does give you a little bit of an opportunity to harvest other reviews and kind of rebrand and recreate to give it fresh life. So when you go out there, but I think the other thing you've got to look at is if you also retitle. So if you change the title of it, or like
Yeah.
Alma's going through and saying, I'm putting out the 20-year collection of both of these, what title are you going to use so that you can connect that potentially to some of the other work that's been done?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And Quinn, your thoughts on losing your reviews?
Well, I rarely pay much attention to them because, number one, they're after the fact. I told an actor friend of mine who was saying, you know, don't you really read your reviews? And I said, not very often. And he was shocked and amazed. And I said, it's a little like taking a curtain call a year after you did the play in a town you never actually performed in. And
That's a very good way to look at it.
and you know, by that time I'm usually 3 or 4 books ahead of what is being reviewed, and so my connection to it is kind of vague. And the other thing is, of course, and I'm sure you all experience it, you know, you have devoted fans who want to catch you doing something incorrect, so that they can crow that they have found an error in your work. And I mean, I'm glad they're having fun, but it doesn't mean anything. The book has been, usually the book's been published, and as I say, I'm at least 3 books past it.
Yeah.
And so
You particularly have to love the reader review that comes in 3 years after the publication saying there's a typo on page 305. And
Yep.
yeah, okay. Well, first of all, this book was proofread 4 times by 10 different people, and we all missed it. So by this stage, it's completely irrelevant.
Right.
well, this is sort of off topic, but before I was writing professionally, I worked in the family business making maps. And we did a very large bed sheet size map of California. And it had been proofread, I think something like 6 times. And
But the-
only after it had been printed in 5 colors did we notice that the town of Vallejo had been left off. So we had to go through and hand letter Vallejo on every single one of the 5,000 copies.
Oh, ouch.
And to this day, when I drive through Vallejo, I get this sort of creepy crawly feeling on my spine.
Right, so
Well, you're
my next,
going through a place that you basically invented because you had to handwrite it on the map. So it belongs to you.
There's a plot bunny there. There's a plot bunny there.
The truth of it is, Vallejo did not exist beforehand until you had to write it 5,000 times. It was the 5,000th time that brought it into existence.
There you go.
so my
But
next,
after a while, you have to do it just by gestalt. You can't try to make sense out of it. You do it too many times, and it all looks wrong.
so Jeannie, my next question. As Jim mentioned, sometimes you change the title, and same with Alma. When it got republished the second time, they changed the first title, but not the second title. What do you do so that you don't annoy your readers into thinking, hey, here's the new book I haven't read, until they get into it and say, this sounds familiar.
That is
So you had
really
the
a
sex
challenging
scene.
thing.
Yeah.
That,
As I walked
that really
by
is
an
a challenging
alleyway,
thing.
I see a sex scene happen.
Yeah.
There you go.
It really is a challenging thing because you don't want to disappoint your readers. You don't want readers returning books because they've read it before under a different title. I tend to do my promotion for those books with that disclaimer that this book was published under this title at this time.
Originally published as, yeah.
Yeah, originally published as. And, you know, I've got actually a perfect example of that is that I was completely naive to the fact, and I own it completely, that there is tentacle porn. And I titled a book, The Tentacle Affair. And it was literally about aliens that were tentacled, and they were not involved in any porn or sex or
Right.
anything. But I had a great deal of difficulty with this book because the reviewers who loved it, I got massive 5-star reviews. It was wonderful. It was great. It was selling really well. But the backside of that was I also had a huge bolus of 1-star reviews that were going, I was expecting this because I like that. And it said tentacle in the title and I was all excited, and it's not. So that was actually one where retitling it was probably the best thing I could have ever done in terms of making sure that an audience recognized what my book was, so that I didn't have sales to people who then returned the book. And now that one was not a rights reversal, but sometimes too, updating the title and cover is a huge bonus for a book, because if you published it in anywhere in the mid to late 90s, especially in romance, everything was a clinch cover. If you published it in the mid 2000s, there were a lot of male chests with guys, the head is cut off, like right about the chin and everything. And that's all kind of faded and made fun of. So if you're retitling and redoing the book cover, you kind of can give it a more modern, whatever is more the driving force now in visual media than it was when you published the book.
So long as you don't go into the 3-hand cover. Remember that one?
Yes, I do remember that one. Yeah, just don't give your heroine extra limbs.
Tentacles.
or tentacles. God forbid you could give them extra tentacles.
Alma, what about you?
Well, so far I haven't gotten to the title mess, because the whole thing was called Changer of Days to begin with, and that's what I'm going back to. The original split happened and it became Changer of Days Volume 1 and Volume 2, which was fine. And then it came to America and they had to put their finger in the pie and they had to retitle the first book. And the first book emerged as The Hidden Queen, which none of us liked, but it was the only title that we could agree on. There was a couple of long lunches with the editor in question where we kind of went, what about no, what about no, what about no, and that went on for a while. And then we eventually came up with this, which was a kind of compromise edition, and that's what it came out for. And I'm just as happy to say goodbye to that title right now. But to me, the whole thing has always been Changer of Days, and I'm going back to that as a title for the whole book, which is pretty much giving it the proper weight, if you like. The way that they kept the title for the second half of the book, it fit there. It fit because that was the subject matter that more directly attaches to that particular thing in terms of, more that than the first half of the book. But the whole thing culminates with the Changer of Days idea. So, I mean, it just covers the whole of the book for me. So I never had to grapple with that kind of title change. On second thought, I mean, there's all kinds of interesting things when it comes to titles. People kept on, a lot of starting out writers were saying, well, you can't use that because it's already been a title of a book. Well, you can't really copyright a title. I mean, one of my novels is called Empress, and if you take a look at Amazon, there's at least 5 novels called Empress. I mean, you can't. It's not a word that you can say, well, nobody else can call a book this because it's my word. I don't know if anybody here remembers the writer. I think she was one of those sort of more sexy romance. Yeah, Cockygate. She wanted to copyright the. I mean, come on, you can't do that. It's language. Yeah. You can't just say, this word belongs to me and nobody else, and you can't use it anymore. I think you might have a problem if you started to write a book that you wanted to call Gone with the Wind, but that's simply because people know that so well, and it's so entrenched and it's so well sketched out that if you try to write a book with the same title,
write a title in America.
What?
you can't copyright a title in America.
No, you can't. But if you try to write a book called Gone with the Wind, you probably wind up with eggs in your face because it's not what people would kind of expect out of that thing at all. So you have to use your own judgment. But no, you can't. The fact of the matter is you can't copyright a title.
No, but
I
you can
think-
get trademarking some things that'll cause you problems.
Yeah, yeah. But there's been several blow-ups about that in the last couple of years, both in the science fiction, fantasy, and romance community, where people were trying to say, no, you can't use my title. And it's like, it's not your title. You can't copyright it.
Right.
There was a young author, a debut author, whose book was quite well received. And she went up against Nora Roberts. And you're like,
Oh, yeah.
what were you thinking? What was your agent thinking? What was your editor thinking to allow you to continue to perseverate on that when you cannot?
As I
copyright the
remember,
title?
Nora Roberts didn't need any help with that at all.
But one of the things I think with rights reversions, when you get books back, I think you have to take a look at them and say, is this still relevant?
Yeah.
Yes, it's work that I put my heart and soul in, but is it still relevant enough that with an edit and a tweak, I can put it back out there? And sometimes the answer to that is no. You look at it and you just go, it was a book of its time and it was good for its time, but I'm not going to republish it because it doesn't work anymore.
So my last question, and I'll start with you, Quinn. You said you've got your rights back on your big series, and you've written or are writing number 34.
Yeah, I'm starting number 34 in about 2 weeks.
Okay. So do you wait until the other 33 get republished, or are you going to throw out 34 first and let
They've
people
only
then?
got two unpublished novels in the series in their stack, so I'm not worried about them running out of material.
Yay. Okay, as a fangirl, I just have to say, yay.
And I'm finishing up the fifth Chesterton Holt mystery, and that's the one in the 1930s, and 1920s, and it turns out, I thought it was going to be a 5-book series, and it turns out it's going to be a 6-book series. And I'm finishing up number 5, and then when I get through with Saint-Germain, I will come back and do the 6th one.
So you don't have any problem publishing the new one before the others get reissued?
No, because they're not done in anything like historical order.
Okay. All right.
They go bounding around all through various and sundry centuries, and sometimes they have references that go back and forth from one book to another. But it doesn't change the fact that, the first one is in 1743, the second one is in 1490 to 1498. The one after that is in the year of the 4 Caesars, which was AD 69. And it goes on like that, for 33 books.
Well, and I think in the case of Quinn series too, each of those books, because they switch around in time, can stand alone.
Yeah.
You could pick a book anywhere in the series, and while Saint-Germain is familiar, if you're a reader of the series, and like, I think you can do that in a number of series, but if you've got a very linear series, I think you do have to go back and start with book 1. You might be able to publish book 34 in the series because you've already got an audience.
Yeah, one hopes, yeah.
And you've got a certain amount of following who's going to buy that because they want the next book in the tail. But I think in a lot of smaller arcs, 3 or 4 books, you kind of almost have to go and publish the full, start with 1 and keep going, as opposed to, like you're referencing, Jason, starting, okay, well, book 5 should come out, and then I'll just go back and reissue the others when I have a moment. I think that could get problematic.
What does that do for your readers, though? Because if they read you at the previous publisher, they may have 1 through 4 and they're waiting on 5, and they're going, wait,
Right.
why are they putting 1 back out again?
Well, I think one of the good news is about news. Some of the good news about when you get a book back, when your rights revert, you don't have to rewrite 120,000 words or 96,000 words. You may have to do some editing and tweaking, but you don't have to sit down and rewrite an entire book. So you can issue them, you can reissue them much more quickly, even if you're doing some tweaks, that you can do that a whole lot faster than you can issue book, brand new book 5. And maybe you turn book 5 loose on the country before you get all 5 books, previous 4 books re-released. But I think in a lot of cases you have to kind of.
People who are waiting for that kind of thing are just going to be waiting for that book anyway, and they're going to be just grabbing it whenever it turns up.
One hopes.
Whether or not they have to wait. I mean, if they know that it's on its way, they won't necessarily go slogging back through 1 through 4 in order to get through 5, but they know that book 5 is coming.
And
one of the most incredible compliments, sort of double-edged sword, that anybody can give you is come rushing up to you and say, I inhaled your book, I read it in a night. And you're kind of going, it only took me a year to write.
Yeah, when's your next one coming?
Yeah.
Wait, I just turned this one in.
Well, and one things we haven't talked about is if you've got series out like that and you've got them out in multiple formats, you've got paperback, you've got hardbacks, you've got audiobooks, you've got ebooks, especially with some of the older series where the publisher may not have picked up the ebook rights, so somebody else has already published the ebooks. Those are available, but now you're dealing with print rights and things that are coming. So you can get rights that are out of sequence. You can actually wind up with formats that are no longer congruent. So if say, Tantor has your audiobook rights and the publisher that had the print and ebook rights, if you get those rights back and you go back and do the rewrites of things you have to, your audiobook may no longer match the other book. So you can also get into places where the versions no longer match. And so I think that's the other thing, is to manage when you're crossing about rights by format.
And that also throws into account all of those books you see on Amazon, a hardback for $300 because it's out of print and rare.
Yeah.
So, all right. I do want to thank all of you. Before we leave, though, I'll start with you, Jim. Let's go around again. Let people know where they can find you on the internet.
You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com. Of course, here at Continual, I do show up some on Facebook and Instagram. Occasionally that Hive of Scum and Villainy that is Twitter, that is Jeannie's Favorite Universe, and a few other places as well. It's not too hard to find me.
All right. Quinn?
Well, mainly at the moment, you can find me on Facebook, and my longtime website is being retooled, because it hasn't been retooled for 20 years. And my online publicist, who is a wonderful, wonderful guy, said, you've really got to do something about this.
All right. Jeannie?
You can find me at jeannieadams.com. You can find me at that Hive of Scum and Villainy, that is Twitter. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm going to be starting to post there a lot because I am in Scotland doing master's work. So I have all sorts of pictures to post. And you can find me here on Continual quite frequently.
All right. And finally, Alma.
I'm at almaalexander.org, not com. Somebody stole .com, and if you go there now, you're going to find a bunch of Chinese dog food. Just be careful what the the suffix, it's .org. You can probably go there and find me in all kinds of different places from there, including the same wretched hive of scum and villainy. I'm on Twitter as well. I'm in all the usual suspects. You can find me on Goodreads. You can find me on Twitter, on Facebook. I don't do Instagram because I just don't. There's just one too many. But other than that, I'm pretty much out there and easy to find. And I am a next to frequent guest on Continual as well. So I may be back here too at some point.
Again, I want to thank all of you for coming and thank everyone for watching. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.